Today's coach's call, we are discussing velocity-based training and what are the key principles of it. So at its core, it is measuring the bar speed within your training. Now, that is the simplicity of it, but there are other metrics, for example, the average velocity, the peak velocity, but we'll discuss that later in the call. The reason I wanted to have this call is there are devices. So, for example, I've got the Rep 1. This is very expensive. It's, I think, £400 last time I looked. But now there are more affordable options like Stance, which is a subscription-based one, which is around £40, I think, per year. Stand if I'm correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. But where it is a lot cheaper, it's becoming a lot more accessible for the vast populace of the powerlifting community. Now, the question lies: is it useful in our training? We have quite strong opinions, and when I bought this one, my coach was like, we're not going to use it. So this is what this call is for. And the first question, or I should say, the topics are in general: what is the velocity-based training? Core uses of VBT, benefits of VBT in powerlifting, where and how to apply VBT, who benefits most, common misunderstandings, future of VBT in powerlifting, and getting started as a coach. So how can you implement it into your system? But with that said, Ryan's first. So a lot of these questions are in part A and part B. The main bulk of it lies in part A. But what defines velocity-based training and the core principles that separate it from traditional percentage or RP-based training models? Then the B is from your own coaching or athlete perspective. What are the key benefits that VBT offer over other approaches that they might miss, especially in powerlifting setting?
Okay, so you summarized it quite well as to like what defines it. It's basically a system that measures bar movement, bar speed, mean velocity, and people who use the system use that data to manage load, volume, intensity, rather than having a fixed like a fixed number. So for example, I know there was one example where they put something like a set of 4 and you have to hit this bar speed. Now you carry on going until that bar speed reduces. So again, that predetermines how many sets that you do. I've never used that type of system before. I've never had experience with it, but it's an interesting concept of we will solely use this like speed as a measurement of how fatigued you are within that given session. So obviously that is one core principle of velocity-based training, or the system for it. As you use it, from what I can make out from it. Oh, sorry guys, hang on. Am I still live?
Yeah.
I can't see you. This is not good.
Oh, well.
Adam, do you want to continue? I'm going to mute him for a second.
So what I wanted to cover is there's subjective data and there's objective data. So there's a separation between velocity tracking and RPE. So RPE is very subjective. So you could argue there's a greater degree of error that could happen, whereas using objective data could make it a little bit more accurate once you've understood the principle after you've accumulated a lot of data over a period of time. There is a principle of how to collect that data, but I think using both of them combined into a program could offer a greater degree of accuracy. But then there's the argument: is it actually necessary if you're actually carrying out the coaching in a good manner? So teaching core principles, being on top of the RPE check, saying why this isn't the RPE it is, and stuff like that. But then leading on to Brandon, the question I had is, if you were to introduce VBT into a powerlifting program, where within the training structure, e.g. main lifts, accessories, etc., do you think it adds the most value, and why? And then the follow-up is, what are some practical strategies for integrating VBT without overwhelming the athlete or overcomplicating the system, especially when combining it with RP or percentage-based approaches.
So to address part A in specific first, which is like if we were to introduce it, where would we do so? And then where do we think it adds most value and why? Compound focused movements is almost always going to be the best, right? Obviously, like your SBD work kind of goes without saying if that is the primary mover that we're most interested in, that we would apply it there. I have seen people, interestingly, use it on more compound focused accessories. So they will put, for example, it on a slant, like a 45-degree slant, and lead the wire up to the sleeve of a leg press. That can be really cool as well. It's been nice to like kind of experiment around with that. Other instances can literally be like if you have the magnetized tips of putting those onto like stacks. Now, stacks of pin weights, that's generally looking at like your tricep push downs, that sort of thing, right? So there's a lot of different uses that you can have. Usually the compound focused ones are going to be the ones that are going to give you the best data, right? The best usable data. One of the big reasons that it adds value is it can make, obviously, as Adam's already said, it can give like a really, really objective metric to training, and can aid then in determining E1RMs. Now, there is like an entirely different formula, an entirely different equation that is used, and that is something that is dependent upon data collection as well. So the E1RMs that you will get perhaps when you first use any sort of VBT unit can be pretty severely far away from what your actual E1RMs are, right? So that's something to be aware of. One of the big things that I have personally experienced in my own use of VBT has been that speed does not equal quality of movement, and that is something that must be separated within this, of operating off of the assumption that if it moves fast, it is good, may not necessarily be factually correct. There are plenty of athletes who can be very, very explosive. Naturally, there are some athletes who will bias more explosive techniques, and those technical changes can be made so that they have a tolerance for lower volume, or I'm sorry, for lower velocities. So that's a distinction that you will need to be careful of when applying VBT. It's worth noting that like this is very multifactorial, and there are a lot of new units of data that you're presented with whenever you get into VBT. So it literally opens up a whole can of worms where you have peak velocity, mean velocity, minimum velocity, percentage velocity loss. You have minimum velocity threshold. There are like so many data points that you can work off, and any one of them can be useful, but not all of them are all of the time, right? And so that's something that like you're given this abundance of data. You don't necessarily have to apply all of it all at the same time. In certain instances, however, it can be very, very worthwhile looking at. Like your mean velocity is usually the number that it will churn out most often. So if you're seeing people using any of these units online and you're seeing the number that it's coming up with, that is giving them the MV or mean velocity. Probably isn't configured to give them the peak velocity or the minimum velocity. However, when we subjectively rate RPE, we're oftentimes looking at RPE based off of the slowest portion of the movement as opposed to the mean portion of the movement, right? So that's a distinction that is really worthwhile making. As far as the second question, what are some practical strategies for integrating VBT without overwhelming an athlete, and what can we use in conjunction with it? I found that it can be a really, really low barrier to entry. So some of the things that we've talked about, like stance, can be very low barrier to entry. There is even lower than that. There is a free version of VBT that you can download on your phone called WL Analysis. It's an app on your phone. There's a paid version of it as well that gives you access to some more things. But if you're curious about VBT and you're not sure whether you want to try it or not, and you don't want to commit to like a $400 piece of kit, try WL Analysis first, see what you think of it, see whether it's useful, and then move on from that point into actually investing into equipment, would be my personal opinion. To be using it in conjunction, in my opinion, with RPE is something that can be very, very helpful as a secondary set of data, right? So you can still derive a great deal of value out of a subjective data point, right? The subjectivity to RPE can still be massively helpful. And I do think that we kind of come into this ebb and flow within the powerlifting realm of we need to be hyper specific and having only objective data. And then we kind of come back into the other way of being like, everything else sucks other than RPE, right? Or what is subjective. And it seems to kind of teeter-totter back and forth, right? At the minute, I do think we're sitting somewhere in between. In my personal experience with those I've interacted with, it seems that we're coming back sort of towards RPE, having come from this really data-heavy culture, I suppose you could use. But I've definitely found relatively good returns with it, using it alongside RPE as a secondary value. The only other instance that I would say, like without overwhelming an athlete, now this is entirely dependent on who you're working with, but you can use it as a sole unit. Like as Ryan has mentioned, there are target velocities for you to hit, there's target velocity losses for you to hit, there's loads of different things that should you have at your disposal, you can use, right? It would be an adjustment in the short term. And so if you have an athlete that's game for that 100%, like if they're all in on, yes, I want the most objective thing possible, then it may be significantly less overwhelming for that particular athlete, right? So again, you're tailoring it all to the individual, but it can be used as a sole unit with relative ease. The caveat to all of that is that the payoffs just vary so much from athlete to athlete, right? And it can bring other challenges, which this is entirely anecdotal. I had probably one of the worst sessions of my life using this because it will only read velocity past a certain distance. And my bench ROM is not particularly large, and it really struggles to read my bench. So I will be doing like my last warm up, or it'll be moving fine. When it gets heavier, my scapula depress more, they get into more retraction, the range of motion gets shorter, and then all of a sudden I just stop getting data back from it. So that is something to be aware of. The software can be really, really like a huge pain in the arse as well. So there's a few caveats as far as that is concerned, that like you might be applying VBT, but it also could literally just be like a hardware or a software thing that ends up with you being like, no, I can't be bothered with this anymore, which ultimately is where I've been left.
In terms of the software side, that's kind of where I drew the line. It was quite complicated to fill in the data, extract the data you actually need, and that's something I would suggest to athletes that are looking to delve into it. Keep it so simple. For example, to follow on from part A of the question was the different readings the velocity tracker does give. So for example, if you've got an Olympic weightlifter, their velocity matters in different stages throughout the lift. So it'll be slow off the floor, but then more explosive. So tracking peak velocity will be more important than, say, in powerlifting, where you're just, the most accurate is just average velocity without overcomplicating it. It's cool. So that's something I'll suggest to lifters is, if you can, I think you can with Rep 1. I haven't got the app anymore, but I think you can change the columns that you're reading so you can only read the ones you want to read. So keep it so simple. But this moves us on to Alice's question. So in your experience of being both a coach and athlete, do you think there are certain types of lifters or athletes, for example, novice, elite, speed, power-oriented, or injury-prone, for example, who would stand to benefit most from VBT and why? And then part B was, how would you adopt the VBT system based on athlete level or training age? For example, would your approach differ from a junior or seasoned national level lifter?
So my experience with velocity-based training is very limited. I've never actually used one myself, and I've never programmed it. But I can see the benefits of using them, especially if you've got like a newer lifter coming in and they don't really understand RPE, even after like constant conversations. It gives an additional toolkit to understanding like their movement, right? It just gives them extra stuff to be going off of. I like the idea of collecting like a set of objective data, like across using it for a week or two, especially if they are new. And I definitely think people who like data, there are people who just like data a bit more, like lifters who just want to get that bit extra. they definitely, I think, would benefit it more because they're going to use it. But people that aren't going to use it, there's no point giving them that extra tool. So my approach would differ between a newer lifter to someone who's experienced. Is that a newer lifter, I would just say, just use it, just get used to it, just collect that bit of data. They're getting to know RPE already, so they're probably going to just make those correlations there between the data they're getting from their tracker and how they're feeling in the RPE. And I don't know, they might agree with it, they might disagree with some of the things that the tracker is saying, but they're new, so they potentially haven't explored higher RPEs just yet. For a more experienced lifter, I know that you can program it in and you can encourage them to track their warm-ups to help with load selection. You can be probably a bit more specific within the programming for a more experienced lifter, like giving them a target velocity. Please correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology, because this is so out of my realm. But yeah, that's how I'd probably differ between a newer and a more experienced one. A newer person, I'd just go, just have a play. So yeah.
The topic or interesting topic I wanted to get onto that is differentiating between a novice and a seasoned national lifter. I think a novice lifter or a completely new lifter might get a little bit overwhelmed with more data to log, but also I think they might see it as a different challenge of, can I make this move even faster than the previous session? And it distracts them away from the core principle of it. That's the only caveat I would place on that. Do you want to go, Brandon?
Yeah, I want to comment on this because I have a personal experience with this. Whenever I first started using VBT, I literally fell into this exact trap of being like, oh, but what if I made this move even faster? And it was fine until I realized the fatigue that I was accruing as a result of it. So to a certain degree, speeding up the concentric is going to help you, right? With that said, if you lose elements of control, or if you do not tailor your volume profile in your warm-ups to account for that, you will be so done by the time you get up to your top set. And that is what happened to me time and time again. If I was 160 was typically my benchmark on deadlifts, and I was like, if I can make this move north of 0.45, it's going to be a great session. And I would almost always take it for a triple. That was fine for the first 3 weeks. I was dying by the time I got into my week 4 and my week 5, and I was like, I'm just hooked from constantly trying to push this as hard as I physically can in warm-ups.
Yeah.
Granted, my psychological buy-in was fantastic for the session, but it did legitimately leave me really, really tired by the time that I got to my top set. So that is a very real thing. That's not just something that we're pulling out of thin air. That is, well, obviously it's only one personal experience and very highly anecdotal, but that is a genuine, very, very real issue.
In the article that we read through, one of the points it made is the accuracy of BBT is dependent on maximizing, as Brandon said, that concentric portion. So doing that as fast as possible would give you top end accuracy, but then that is not sustainable in training because, as he said, 3 weeks in, he was gassed out. So that is something to be aware of. But in its application, I think with the more advanced or seasoned lifter, they understand the core principles a little bit more. They've gauged or refined their RP protocol, so their understanding of it. So then they could potentially introduce external data to be a little bit more accurate. But I wouldn't knock it and say for novices or newer lifters to not use it, but just be very cautious and wary about using it. So this now leads me on to Fulham. From your perspective as a specialist in the practice of physiotherapy, how might VBT be used as a tool for early detection of fatigue, movement compensation, or elevated injury risk in lifters, especially during volume or high intensity blocks? And the follow-up question is, do you see value in using VBT as a part of return to training or rehab protocols for injured athletes? If so, how might it inform decisions around load progression, movement quality, or safe intensity thresholds?
So before I even answer, I want to say I'm not anti-VBT, but I am just cautious of like what it is and like how it's overstated. So agreeing with like what everyone else is saying, it does throw you out of position a lot of times when you're trying to go fast. To answer that first part of the question, to monitor like fatigue and movement breakdown, I think it has like limitations. Fatigue and like compensation don't always show up in velocity loss. A lot of the times athletes will push through technical breakdowns without a major drop in bar speed. And I see that with my in-person athletes, although they're not powerlifters, they are still performing like your squat movements or bench press movements. And you can see that where when they try to go fast, their heels or the toes are coming off the ground, or they're literally almost jumping off the ground. I think like, and also I think like external load velocity doesn't always like reflect the stress on the internal joints or the like asymmetries that they have. But yeah, that's my biggest take on fatigue and injury risk. And then returning to training or rehab, I can see Callum just completely thinking right now. In terms of like return to training or rehab, yes, I agree that it adds objectivity, but I would be like very cautious of overemphasizing it. Because again, like, yeah, you may show improved like bar speed, but again, that could come from compensation or like altered technique and strategy, and not necessarily the improved capacity of the tissue, which is what we're kind of going for, just the tissue's ability to kind of regain that load. So I prefer like kind of a more like, I wouldn't say like pain response, for like a lack of a better term, just how that joint or that tissue is feeling within those movements, versus trying to be super objective on a number or velocity.
Am I good to? Okay. I just wanted to push back. I have so many things I want to say, but just for this bit for now, the key thing that you just said, especially so in that specific circumstance, is yes, it provides objectivity. Have you ever objectively tried to return someone to sport? Or is it entirely subjective in how you're trying to review how they feel and like their response internally as they do the thing, right? Like all of it is, it's pain responses, sensation, control. We're never objective, or when it comes to like solely objective, when it comes to like the rehab world, the subjective is such a vital element.
Yeah, it does. In terms of
yeah, I know. I think that's why I come like, so where you're saying like being dubious of it, to be objective in rehab would be like trash. Like I think it's where you take away the human element of where the confidence is, the psychology, the pain signals, all of the things that play into someone actually returning to sport. This isn't at you, this is at VBT, because I have many angry notes. But I think in that context, like if someone said like, we're going to make sure that you can return because you had those knee issues, and so if the bar speed travels at 0.4, we're fucking on. Idiocy. Like it would be insanity. So yeah, it's the objective measure that actually makes it, as Brandon was saying in programming, being objective takes away the human element of a lot of this. And I'll come back to the rest of that when it gets to my question. I'm holding back.
I wanted to add on that. So like you said, the objectivity of it is just the pure number itself, but there's so much more that goes on and go into it. Like if an athlete is walking into this, like, oh, my knee's not completely like 100%, it's going to be harder for me to push faster. You're not going to get that same result. You're going to get a point. If we're aiming for like a 0.4, you're going to get maybe a 0.2, 0.3. Just because psychologically they're like, I'm not ready to push.
So now leading on to a question to everyone. So this is where you have your own idea or take either on. So I'll cover the question first. What do you see as the most common misunderstanding, misuse, or limitation of velocity-based training among lifters or coaches new to method, and why? My initial one, which is we've already discussed, is the lifter always striving for a better or higher velocity. But let's hear your guys's.
I think a lot of people have hopped into VBT because they saw the funny string attached to people who are at the Olympic level or the world level, right? And they've gone, Emil Krastev uses it, so it must be good. And that's just not the case. Like,
I'll come in. I'll
yeah,
come
go
here
for it.
and say, I bought this because of Bryce from Calgary Barbell. I saw him using it, and I think I ordered this when I was 22, and I've used it. I haven't used it in about 2.5 years.
So
But yeah,
what's so funny about that in particular is that like the brand, this sounds crazy, but honestly it does check out. The brand of velocity tracker that someone has usually is indicative of who they first saw using it. Mine was Vitruve because it was Emil Krastev and Taylor Atwood that I saw using it. Right. And so most people saw the funny string and they went, funny string, make lift go burr, must have funny string, and they hopped on the bandwagon without really having a proper understanding of how to use it. So that's one of the biggest things that I've seen is like most people, and particularly with stance, like I have such a big appreciation for equipment in powerlifting in general, and I think that this is pushing us more into the world of having something in powerlifting that is more objective to the standards. Like, could be a tangent here, but having something like VAR for squat depth, that would be amazing, right? So that we could just have this is clearly in or it's clearly not, and on those borderline calls, right? That having this kind of trajectory is a good thing. Having this trajectory, however, for like any powerlifter to have access to this equipment it's a double-edged sword of like this could either be a great thing or it could be a really, really poor thing. I know a lot of people who have hopped on stance and no harm, like their tech went out the window. Like any amount of technique that they had gained just went straight out the window because they're like, well, it's just bar speed, bro. So that's again, like we've all kind of commented on that, but that's one of the biggest things. And if you feel called out by that, it probably applies to you, man. Like, get off.
Comment below and be angry about it.
Yeah, that's fine. Be angry and get in my DMs about it. But legitimately, like, if you feel called out because your tech has went poorly, or you've started regressing since you've used stance or whatever, I'm naming stance, but any VBT, you probably fall into that bracket.
I think there is a practical application for the likes of Taylor using it because every percent matters. Whereas, so they've had years and years and years and years of experience. So that 1 kilo could take ages to put on their total, but understanding the principles behind it, another metric of data can help refine the protocol. Whereas a newer lifter, you can still get a percentage response without it. So that's kind of the little standpoint there. But Callum, let's hear from you.
My unpopular opinion is it's nothing but a fad in its infancy that people are pretending they have any idea how to use. It's now a popular thing because it's shiny and it's new and it gives people a reason to think that they're smarter than before. We're saying it's new data that no one has ever used before. It's been used in one study ever to compare RPE versus velocity tracking with 12 participants who were rugby players. So they had never used RPE or velocity, which is idiocy to say that has any validity in powerlifting. And all it did was make them good at using RPE because after the 12 weeks, the diminished return was substantial. So all it is a really good idea to go, hey, you don't know RPE? Well, I can't coach for shit, so this will teach you how to use RPE instead. That's my unpopular opinion.
I wanted to add to that. I think all new powerlifters should learn movement proficiency first before BBT.
Like, just to add in again, it's just being like, it is that at its core because it's like the most irrelevant information to everything the newbie needs to understand. Okay, you're a bit crap with your RPE. We can live with that. What we can't live with is that you keep trying to chase a bar speed or you keep thinking it's relevant when you don't know how to control it. Most injuries that we've referred to are like related to either speed or lack of control, tension, whatever, which are all the antithesis of bar speed, which they would be chasing. So in my opinion, like heightened risk of injury, like miscommunication for what your athletes are actually searching for. And all you're doing is just like cradling someone so that they don't have to learn how to use RPE, which is a very short learning curve if you have a hands-on approach for coaching.
So I think with coaching, we're just trying to keep it as simple as possible so we know what's working and what's not. But then my question to Callum, is we've discussed the application at the elite level. Where would you stand on that with Taylor using it?
I think so. We were talking about 1% with athletes, right? And so I know obviously Taylor's coach, and they understand how to use data. And so the idea being that there is that 1%, and this is someone who does. So, okay, simplistic parts of programming over time. You're going to run elements that someone has responded to. He hasn't changed his body mass for a significant amount of time, so there isn't much in the way of like hypertrophy, these volume phases with different demands. So an amount of volume serves him well through different phases. So when they get back to returning to cycle 3 that sits with 25 working reps, the incremental difference is massive for someone who does it for over a decade. And that's a repetition of the same sort of process. So understanding, okay, actually this RP6 on this week 3 of this cycle was actually incrementally better. So we are working towards longevity. So he does need that small amount of detail because he's lived in one weight class and they know what works. And so when you know what works, it gets really, really hard to find the rest. I will still say when Taylor has those sessions and goes, I called it early because I felt wrecked, or actually that didn't feel as good as I wanted to, and he didn't pay attention to velocity, that was still more important. I think it makes sense for him because it's so highly repetitive for such a long time.
I was just about to add on to that as well. That data is probably secondary data to everything else. I think it's just a little add-on that he probably doesn't pay any more attention to than anything else, i.e. like his RP ratings and stuff like that, his awareness, because he's at that level to where he's like, I'm not going to be pushing top end speed coming out the whole of a squat. Like, he's just wanting consistency. So trying to find that little 1% add-on is just that little bit more of a, okay, this is an indicator that we are probably heading in the right direction and nothing more. Whereas I think a lot of these people over glorify what velocity based training actually is. They're chasing their bar speed all the time. And it's like everyone said here, a lot of people aren't aware of how they move through space. And if they try to move at maximal speeds, something's going to go wrong. Maybe not week 1, might not be week 2. It's going to be week 3 and week 4.
It's kind of like you would probably give a toddler like a water pistol to play with, but you might not give a toddler a 9mm. Yeah. Different tools for different levels.
You might not.
Yeah. Please
I
note that
think we've
there's
just
a
been being honest.
massive portion of sarcasm in that. You're not going to give a toddler a 9mm, right? But you would give it a water pistol. So this is the thing of like, there are different tools for different people of different proficiencies, right? Like if you have never welded anything, you might want to know that you need a mask to do so, otherwise you might go blind. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's the very, very technically proficient use it and get some degree of return because the basics are so well mastered that they have, in my opinion, earned the right to that unit, right? Like, I haven't used this in, I don't know, like well over a year now, maybe coming on 2 years now. I haven't used it. And it's because I just personally feel I haven't earned it. Like my technique is still changing. I am not a master of the basics to the level that I want to be before I can start using that and getting in any way, shape, or form decent returns. So just evaluate whether you deserve a water pistol, a BB gun, or a 9mm.
Like I said, at its core, in powerlifting, we're always seeking to get that greater total. So with that, more often than not, as you go through your career, you're going to be increasing your body weight. So that's going to be changing where your optimal position is. So again, it's not, you're not remaining consistent with that technique. So as Brandon said, earned it. Alice, do you have one?
All I can think about is this seems like the best type of training a robot coach could give to his robot athletes who can't lift badly, and it's just all numbers. That's all I can think of this being like. If it was 100% velocity based training, it has to be a robot coach and robot lifters. That's all I have.
Can I say, not only is that perfect and absolutely true, but that robot would never change body weight or age, and then it would be valid.
Might get a few squeaky joints. But right, next question I have is for Callum. With your experience within the field of powerlifting, both from an athlete and coach perspective, what do you believe is the most realistic trajectory of a BBT and powerlifting over the next 5 to 10 years? Not just through integration, but with the shift in underlying training philosophies, coaching decisions, and long-term athlete development. Then the follow-up question is, if a coach with no prior BBT experience wanted to implement it effectively into their system, how would you sequence the learning and integration of the process for both coach and their athletes? So after what you've said, I think about don't use it at all, but
well, okay, so I do have, first of all, I apologize for the fact that I'm incredibly opinionated about this and I think it's poorly used. The second thing is you'll have to remind me the second question in a bit because I've forgotten it already. But my opinions on this come from a good place. It's just like, it's a new thing. The people who love velocity trackers are the same people that love putting a baking mat on their bench. Like, it's just a thing that's trendy, and so they just want to do the thing that they say gets 1%, but don't have to use it. But the future of it actually makes sense. Like, it does make sense, but it just, you have one study that's short term that's not done. So here's the future that I would think would be incredible. One is that it's embedded in a barbell. It's not your shitty little trackers, and so it actually can track relative movement, because at the moment it doesn't work. That it has some coaches willing to spend a ridiculous amount of time wasting people's careers learning how to program it, because those people will make it better for the rest of us. So none of us have ever seen a program. Yes, they do. Well, it's in, sorry, Brandon's just saying that the Alico have a VBT bar. It's a little disc that goes in the end of the barbell. And yeah, so it's still very early days, but there will be coaches that will do the work so that the rest of us can go, oh, this is how that impacts programming over significant periods of time. But it's just not been utilized. And I would hope most coaches would go, I'm not going to screw around my training, my athletes training that much and guess for a long time. Seeing it in parallel can be really helpful because it just tells you over a year what that information looked like. Just don't use it in your programming, personal opinion. So developmental of programming in the future would be fantastic. Actually seeing it tied into equipment. And go on.
So obviously we want to protect the growth of our athletes. So I think the way to go about it is having a lot or vast majority of coaches incorporate into their own training, so they're not messing up what their coaching is. So I think that's.
I respect coaches.
Yeah,
my training's already shit.
So I think that would be more appropriate because you're not messing up the experience, but you're testing for yourself if you're willing to step back a little bit from your training. But
nice that you're gonna not put it in our programs. That's so upsetting. One really cool thing that would actually be helpful is voice communication from the tracker. So for instance, RP6 out loud. So you know you've hit it. Because if you want to program at velocity loss, yeah. So literally just like being able to get the immediate feedback of what that each rep has fallen as an RPE. Because if you were like, I think velocity loss is the most important part of it. I think that's the thing. The only reason I'd love to see it in use more is peak velocities around rep 3, substantial loss at rep 4, and it's a huge diminished return on rep 6. So we'll only program in the 5s because that's what's actually going to give us a return. Velocity loss is one of the biggest representatives of strength training. In barbell, I put research being the biggest thing because there just isn't any. The next thing was about integration, right? Integrating into someone's, okay. So one, it being at the same time as you see other systems, understanding that actually some people who have never seen RPE don't know how they'll be in the gym or sign up for powerlifting coaching in that case, but still that those people maybe use velocity for a short scope of time to teach them the tool and then you crack on without it. Most of this is just me being angry. Oh, custom RPE charts. So obviously I know that, what's the fucking brand? Someone remind me, who's the RTS, like doing the custom RPE charts that are linked to velocity. Having a system that builds that for athletes, like that has promise, and that obviously has a better tie to it. It would also have to account for so many things. I'm not going to bother even listing them off, but the amount of things that would have to account for through rep ranges, through movements, through different variations, and so on to be valuable would be monstrous, but you could build that.
I was thinking to, if we wanted to develop it in our sheets, I was thinking of, because it's going to be forever changing. You're not going to remain consistent. So it's like a way to integrate it into your training cycles, where the first block is refamiliarizing that RPE chart, so it stays consistent with where you are at now. Because if you use a metric from, say, 2-3 years ago, that metric won't be accurate. So I think that's how I'll probably go about it in introducing it into a cycle. Is every cycle, every first block of each cycle, is to have that initial cycle or initial block to refresh what those metrics would be. What did someone place in the chat?
Cheryl just saying she wants her week 6 first. Oh yeah, week 6 first.
Yeah. I will let you at the end of that. Did you have any more to add onto that, Callum?
It's only something that was mentioned earlier because it just proves why velocity is so naff at the moment. Is saying like in order to scale it properly, the warm ups have to be moved at peak velocity. That is not how warming up works. I'm like there is. Okay, maybe when you get to your final warm-up, that becomes part of the conversation. But like, if my athletes just started speed running their warm-ups, their technique will get worse. I need them to be slow and controlled, to be intentional, to understand it's not just warm-up for blood flow; it's warm-up for mechanical preparation, and it doesn't work.
I think that's very common when athletes go to test their warm-up max, or when they go into a competition. So when they're warming up, like for example, my warm-ups, they're pretty slow. Like, I'm not looking for speed at all. I'm just I make each rep look the same speed. Ideally, obviously, it's going to degrade over a period of time, but I try to make it look exactly the same. But what I do see is athletes do that in training, but when it comes to competition, like, oh, now I need to make it move fast, and the technique goes out the window. The first attempt is a bit shoddy. But with that said, that is all the questions I had. So we have to be concise for this. But does anyone have any further questions or discussion points that they want to add into it? So I see you nodding, John. Add. Was that just? Does anyone else have any questions? Or
adding the time efficiency that we had.
Crushed it.
That all done?
I will say this, and I kind of want to open this up a little bit. I am curious to know people's opinion on using just kind of moving away from VBT, but using external metrics in competition for validity of lift. Because there's a lot of things that are kind of stated, like for example, the elbow depth rule, its enforcement, squat depth rules, the variance of its enforcement, right? Where we have a lot of different sports that we look at that have things like VAR, right, which I've already mentioned. And maybe this is just personal preference, but I would actually love to see that in the sport. I think we have it in like nearly every other Olympic sport to some way, shape, or form. And if the IPF are pushing for that direction, then I feel like that's a key part of it. But what do you guys think?
There's a guy I saw on Instagram that's developing a piece of software to track body movement and those metrics. I don't know if you've seen, but potentially that could lead to something. It's a very complex program.
Is this the thing where it's like basically a electronic spirit level that goes on the thigh? Is that the Are you thinking of the same thing?
So it's essentially just a camera, but it's a software that he's developed through coding, which outlines where the body is. So using lines, it will establish where joints are. You can measure the bar speed based on where those lines move. It can establish your range of motion on all these different variables. I've seen it. I don't know how it's doing now, but from what I saw, it's really complex to make. But that's potentially something that could be introduced into powerlifting. I don't know if he's seeking for that, but that would be very useful.
I think it's mental that we need to look for something really complex when we can't get juries to actively use the videos back. Like I do agree. Actually, I'm so on board. Like the whole bench depth rule is one of the most poorly applied things and could be so simple with like actual just simple technology of a fucking line.
Mm-hmm.
I have to apologize. I swear about all of this because I'm weirdly emotional. But I think like the fact that we don't use what we have and most of the federation across like its regions don't even pay for medals, we're not going to see it. But I absolutely think it's not only necessary, but obvious. Like it's ridiculous that we don't have it in any format yet.
On the flip side, why do you guys think we don't have that yet? At least at the high level, like at nationals, internationals.
Oh, I'll do it. I'll do it. We just had NIPF nationals, and no, this is quite a. Ooh, can I say this? A lot of people had a lot of complaints at NIPF nationals, about like judging, reffing, the position of the judges, the position of the refs, like almost I think in nearly every flight of every session, all three judges were in front of the rack for squats. There were just instances where, different commands were given at different times, which is kind of just a courtesy to the lifter. But there were a few different things like warm-up room areas such as that, right? Like equipment availability. Granted, that's a national level competition. So if you're saying national and international, this is like falls into that category. I don't know how far this extends. And I know that this greatly differs between like local federations. It's in my mind as a lifter and as a coach, partly a degree of care and partly a degree of funding, which is tied to incentive. There's a lot of lifters who have not got a lot of incentive to compete and are losing the incentive to compete, particularly when they have like poor experiences at national level competitions. On the flip side of that, because they are losing incentive, the federations are losing finances and then cannot afford to like pay judges, pay spotters and loaders, pay referees, whatever, or have enough refs for a jury table. Like there are instances like that I think cause massive complications in this. Of like, I do genuinely believe that powerlifting in general as a sport is just in its infancy, like just to the same degree that VBT is in its infancy. There are the sport in general is in its infancy, and so there's quite a few challenges that come along with that. I'd be really excited to see what happens. Like if we had 4 times the membership in any given federation, like what would that do to the production value of the comp? What would that do to the equipment availability, the whatever, right? There's a lot that you can unpack with that, right? But what are other people's experiences at like national level meets in particular?
I'm going to chime in, but I'm going to go from the ground up. Like a regional competition is where an athlete first gains their experience. Now, having done so many competitions now as an organizing, you lose money. Point blank, you lose money. I use obviously the gym that I work in. All the equipment is mine, and we charge, I think it's something like 45, 50 quid, whatever it might be. Regardless of how many athletes you have, because you have to pay a fee I have to pay to the Southwest, and the limited availability of equipment is very limiting as a regional competition, as an entry point competition, which I think takes away from lifters coming into the sport. Now we try to put on as best of a show as we can at a financial cost. And I do that because I fucking love the sport. Like, regardless of what level I am, I fucking love the sport and I want to get as many people in it as possible. But I know a lot of people are in it for the financial gain. So I very much agree. It's very much in its infancy. And I think for the national competitions to go up a level, I first feel like the ground level competitions need to level up first. And that can only happen with help from the higher ups, which we don't get. We do not get.
Also, the fact that you have to charge like £40 for a competition, like, because I get the ease of entry, except for the same people who are wearing the £100 singlet, the £100 knee sleeves, they can pay £100 for the competition, like maybe just don't buy the riggers. And so like you could literally double it, and then because I ran comp and lost thousands, I intend to run comps and make minimum 1,000 to put back into the competition, and be like, it's because we have to charge so little, and because there's a culture around it. Can I sidetrack this very quickly with an idea I had while we were talking and be like, if this isn't the greatest thing, I genuinely think this is an amazing idea. Right. You can't get a start command in competition. Fuck you, Cheryl. You can't get a start command in competition until both side refs put their hand down and the front person says the right command. Hopefully, unless you're at Brandon's competition, they say squat when you're benching. But why is it not a traffic light in front of the lifter when they are squatting or deadlifting? Why does it not just have red, you can't go, and then hands are down, and then it goes green, and you're allowed to squat? Why is there anyone talking? And then why the side refs, I don't have to look for them and check. It's just they press the button to go, and that's it. There's no feedback time.
I don't think we ever look at the ref. We just go off that sound.
And you go for the sound. I'm like, if you
Yeah.
just the color, I'd know to go.
Yeah, like the only thing that reminds me of is international comps where you have the beeper for every
Yeah.
30 seconds and then the beep beep for every 10 seconds down. Like if you are visually impaired, for example, instead of it being a light, it could also be like audible at the same time. But I actually do think that's a good idea because there's so many times where I've seen like sitting at the side watching my lifter where one of the side refs still has their hand up in bench and they still get a start command.
Exactly.
I'm like, hey,
it could just say
that
amber.
shouldn't have happened. Like,
I just thought we were talking about technology to implement and being like, I don't know why there's still a guy in front of me doing this. I still think that's mental.
I think in an ideal world, the software would be so developed that you would not need a ref.
Yeah.
Like
What does weightlifting have?
I'm not 100% sure, but if you can get that or that software to establish what it would mean to be in the start for the bench press, what elbow depth is, it can remain far more consistent rather than an objective basis or like a subjective basis that the refs are going off of. Because we see it all the time where refs are just making absurd calls and it ruins it for that lifter and it tarnishes their experience and they then want to get back into the sport or do subsequent competitions.
I think you've nailed it on the head with the software, though. I don't think it's readily available yet. I.e., how many competitions have we all been to where the lights don't work? We've all been to competition where those lights fuck up. Now it only takes one of them when an athlete is there under a bar ready to squat for the light to not for that light to not turn green. That would be the only negative against that is that software would have to be so fucking reliable.
Yeah.
But again,
the left-hand referee or the left-hand referee needs to be reliable because half the time it's just one of them hasn't hit the button.
I was going to say the amount of bad calls I've seen versus lights not working, as much as the lights thing is always that, oh, we're just waiting for one more light. And the dude who's 70 years old staring at the thing being like, is this a mobile? Like I think there's like I'd still I would still think that the software is least frequently the issue. Go on, Cone.
I was going to
Wi-Fi based.
Wait, say again.
What if it's not Wi-Fi based? Because I know in the US we use like lifting cast for our stuff, so you need like connection and stuff. So if your connection is shoddy, you're gonna be delayed. I can't remember because I think at the national level events they use something called like a D3 system. I haven't used it, but I don't know if it's Wi-Fi based, but there's like buttons you click. So if we don't have a Wi-Fi based, chances of it crashing are much lower. Yeah. And it's just on the referee to press the button.
I was going to add to the financial side. So where volunteers within the sport are necessary, but I think a lot of what puts it off is the time they give to the sport is not subsidized enough. So whether they'll work full-time jobs or they can't take the time, they need to be paid for their time, and it's not adequate for what it's been inputted for. The software, whilst the initial setup of the software would be huge, like Lifting Cast, as soon as it's made ready for everyone to just implement. So it could be more affordable. It's that less cost for the host of that competition to uptake. Go on.
I just want to push back on something because everyone says it. I actually really disagree, which is that cost has anything to do with volunteers. I don't think the fact that they're not subsidized is anything the reason people can't get volunteers. Because we run the DBD Open, we get 40 volunteers and we don't pay a penny. And I think it's because they are not returned to in the fact that the federation don't care about them, because the only people they care about are the top of the sport. And so like all of the newbie people are like, why would I turn up to this competition and give back? Because you literally don't care. And so I think it's a culture issue. It's not a cost issue.
Yeah.
I was just about to say we don't typically struggle with volunteers for our comps either. Again, it's down to like there's other things, there's location and things like that, but from our experience, we've never struggled.
It's because it's a better community. People who like want to give back to the sport because the sport gave to them, and then most people don't want to give back to the sport because the sport doesn't give to them.
Am I wrong in saying that my baseline assumption is that any federation is at its core still a business, right?
Yeah.
So, granted, like there's certain aspects of this that will be financial, but like the culture of a business, like the culture of like this is DBD is a powerlifting team and a business, right? The culture of DBD is directly influenced by the people who are a part of the business, right? And so the culture of a federation, it stands to reason, is made up of the people who are part of it, right? I think a big part of it is like seeing the people who are, is empowered the right word to stay? Like Ireland and the UK are, well, specifically the island of Ireland is in a really unique position because we have NIPF, Irish PF, and BP. So those are all three very viable options. Most people kind of filter it by way of like competitivity. So they'll go, their first competition will be NIPF. Once they, or unless they want to go GB for whatever plethora of reasons, they will continue to compete NIPF until they win NIPF nationals, show up to GB, and then they will like try and get international representation for the GB team. If it's not that, they'll go Irish PF and they'll probably stay Irish PF. But that means that those people lose it, right? The competitivity, like if we actually empower good athletes or give good athletes incentive to be able to stay within a federation, the competitivity goes up, more people want to join, there's better production value, there's more whatever, right? There has to be an element of sacrifice there, but I think one of the biggest like basal things that Callum has mentioned, Ryan, you've mentioned it as well, is that like the athletes know that they're cared about. That's one of the like biggest and deepest things. The gym that I train at in Utah, whenever Kat and I live over there, it's called Barbell Therapy. Huge shout out because they have always made people at meets feel cared for. Like there is goodie bags for every single athlete. There's just so much stuff going on, like just down to the way that people talk to you at the meet. If you need anything, you can ask the gym owner, and like he will so readily sort you out, or the meet director, and she will so readily sort you out. Like there's so many different things where like, yes, you care. On the spotters and loaders thing, I know that at those meets, spotters and loaders are paid $100 each. That's like £80 each-ish. That's like for one session. Like if you're a spotter and loader team and you want that event to go quicker, you'll make it go quicker. Like you'll act like an F1 pit stop team and you'll make it happen, right? I've seen meets, this is a whole different issue, but like I've seen meets run on for 6 hours, like a session of 2 flights of like 15 lifters a flight, so 30 athletes run for no joke 6 hours, and I've seen the exact same quantity of lifters, particularly at that barbell therapy meet that they do. I think it was 3 hours and 45 minutes. Same number of people. All of it was the spotters and loaders. And the reason they went so fast is because they knew that they had a duty and a job to do for those lifters and for the audience as well. Like, powerlifting isn't growing because it's a horrible sport to watch. Like, it's so horrible. If it was 2 attempts, sick, but it's 3, right? And so it's so boring that like the spotters and loaders, if they're at least going fast, rattle through all those first attempts and just get this like 60-second attempt over with.
I do want to add on that. Going back to like showing that you care about the athletes. When I ran my meet, I took this idea from Callum when they did the open, was writing, or not writing, but printing the athlete's name on the back and literally saying athlete underneath it. And the feedback I got from every single athlete was they love the shirts. And no one knows this. Well, now they will. The front side of the shirt was actually misprinted, but no one really cared because it said athlete on the back side. They all got like separate goodie bags and stuff like that. But I also want to add on, like, it comes down to the meet director where the production of your meet has to match the price for the registration fee that these athletes are paying. If you are charging north of $130 US and you are taking 6 hours, or your spotters and loaders are very slow, you have no hype, music sucks, lighting sucks, it's just, why are you paying that much?
Can I recommend we do an entire call based on how to make powerlifting better? Because we are tangenting like a motherfucker.
Yes, I gotta go now, guys.